history is all about what's documented. And sometimes things go undocumented. What we try to surface in this research is to make the invisible visible, making it visible again.
My name is Carol Bauer, and in 1976, 5 women, of which I was not one, got together and decided to start some kind of service for women who'd been raped. I joined not very long after that. It had only been going for a short time. How that happened was that the group that started the organization put up a little advert in the women's room at the University of Cape Town, which I saw, and I joined, and I was part of the first training course. I remained as a volunteer in rape crisis, as a counselor and public education speaker for the next 10 years until 1986, and went on to other things. And I came back to rape crisis in 1996 as the first ever paid director. When rape crisis started, the term marital rape was a contradiction in terms. Sex within marriage was specifically defined in law as his right and her responsibility. So theoretically, or at least legally, a married woman could not be raped by her husband. That is no longer the case.
Hi, I am Brenda Madumis, Director at Wise for Africa, a non-profit organization that focuses on gender equality and equity advocacy work and gender-based violence. My early days of working in the ANC Women's League in particular, because working for the ANC came after, and we're talking here in the 90s, early 90s, 1991, 92, after the unbanning of the African National Congress. My early days of the ANC was a discussion on women's rights and how we ensure that those rights are entrenched in the ANC policy work. And the first ANC policy conference, that's where you realize that gender equality and equity was not priority.
I'm most appalled to find that there are still so many male chauvinists. There are people who are talking about giving us 10%. That is absolutely ridiculous.
Once the elections were over and there was a policy decision to advocate for women's inclusion and women's emancipation, we then needed to develop more work around how all of that should be rolled out and even manifest itself, and what we meant by gender equality at the time. And once the ANC got into government, the first work was on the termination of pregnancy that came before Parliament, because we had worked on that and we believed in women's reproductive health and that women have got the right to choose. And so that was the first critical policy work that we undertook and took it to Parliament to ensure that you have what we now have, the Termination of Pregnancy Act.
The government.
Hello everyone, my name is Caroline Peters. I'm an African feminist and human rights defender. I'm the founder and executive director of Palace Foundation. So in the early days of the Western Cape Network on Violence Against Women, and you can see this broad smile when I think of the Western Cape Network on Violence Against Women, I smile. And especially those early days, you know, when we saw activism at its best. I always say that we miss activism in our spaces. Remember, there wasn't a Domestic Violence Act yet, even though, so from the late 98 it started, it says, but we know how many years it took to be implemented. I think the year 2000, etc. So we were part of being able to shape the Domestic Violence Act as civil society. So we had focus groups, different groups of women. The Western Cape Network on Violence Against Women was made up of different regions, and every region had a representative at the Network on Violence Against Women. The committee was established like that. Every woman's voice was heard. Women tell their stories. We had the lived realities. And remember, in those days, in 1999, it wasn't easy for women to come out and tell these stories. Now there's different platforms, there's various things. We encourage women to speak up and speak out, but we came from a dispensation in those years where things were quiet, you don't speak out of the family. There was a lot of education to be had around women telling their stories, that violence against women was not a personal, private matter, that it affected everybody. So there was lots of education to be had at the time.
I'm Yolanda Gangi, an African feminist and award-winning social entrepreneur. So as a student activist at Rhodes University, particularly in my second year, this was in 2016, myself and a number of students mobilized under the hashtag RU Reference List, which was a campaign and a sporadic campaign, a sporadic movement that erupted on the 18th of April 2016, essentially responding to the crisis of rape culture and sexual and gender-based violence at our university campus. The use of social media was a tool during the student movement, for the fact that these protests erupted in a time where social media then was being used more and more as a platform to share information, to mobilize and organize, people from different corners of our country and even the world. It was a key moment, and I think it really strengthened the way in which then the movement spread, the call to action, the message of the movement, what we were protesting against. The use of then social media allowed us to reach, wider and larger audiences. It allowed us to be in control of our story, of our narrative. In an age where obviously traditional media has been the most popular, the common platform used to share, information at such a large scale, we then opted to use, what was within our reach, which were our phones, our laptops, to not only just, tell the story, but also to share the visuals, the actual live action, the actual pushback, the state violence that students were up against. We were able to archive, these experiences.
My name is Peli Sankomo. I am a development economist and equity expert. I classify myself as a social scientist. When I talk about my gender-based violence or violence against women experience, for me, I remember the fact that I'm raised by a single parent who was semi-skilled, who worked as a clerk in Butterworth in the Eastern Cape in a textile industry. Alone, we moved from different houses because the system would not allow, where we were in Butterworth, forcing women to actually own houses. Even though she was working, she had acquired a massive amount of experience in the factory, but she could have never been promoted to be a clerk. There are certain things that have changed post-democratic dispensation. I think I must not acknowledge, and I must acknowledge that, in fact, I have benefited from a democratic dispensation, but there's a lot that needs to be done. I applaud and women and feminists of this country, gender justice activists, for the work that they've done in as far as the gender-based violence and femicide interventions. In fact, we're probably one of the first countries in Africa that has really designed a very concise policy document that seeks to deal with gender-based violence. It's true that you will get, a section of communities or members of society who said we're not consulted. But in fact, that strategy is so comprehensive. If you look at the 6 things it deals with accountability and leadership. So it's about how do we get leaders accountable and lead openly the conversation on gender-based violence.
Malende sunshine,